My name is Anna. I'm a full-time working potter, and today I'm going to make a wholesale order. So this order is for 30 mugs total with 3 different designs. One design is in brown clay and the other 2 are in white clay, so I'm going to get started with the white clay today. I'm going to make 12 of mugs of each design in case anything goes wrong. This could be cracking while drying, I could chip one or drop one when I'm moving them around, or the glaze could crawl and drip. There's just so much that can happen, so it's best practice to always make extras. I'm also pretty particular about accepting wholesale orders, and I have a lot of boundaries when I do. I don't do custom work usually, so I'll only accept wholesale orders if a business is interested in a design from my repertoire. So this order is for banana slug mugs, a design that I sell regularly, but I wouldn't take on an order for a mug with a brand's logo on them or something like that. Essentially, I want to spend my studio time making things that I'm passionate about, and I work with businesses that can support me in that. That being said, I also limit my wholesale orders for financial reasons. I'm selling these pieces to a business in large quantities for resale, so I give them a 25 to 40% discount off my retail prices. But I also have a lot of wonderful direct customers who buy my work at full price, so I don't want to get into a situation where I am making so many wholesale orders that I don't have time to create enough work to sell directly to customers, because then I would be losing potential sales and money. I want to find a balance where I'm filling some wholesale orders, but I also have the time to make enough work for all the people who are buying directly from me. This was my first day working on this order, and I threw 24 mugs in white clay. It was my plan to handle them and sculpt on them the next day, but it's been cold and rainy in Santa Cruz this week, so things are drying pretty slowly. I left the mugs out and uncovered all night, but when I got back to my studio the next morning, they were definitely still too wet to continue working on. So I figured I might as well do the rest of the throwing I need to do for this order. I just need 10 mugs in brown clay for this order, but I'll throw 12, that way I have 2 extras. I usually just eyeball my clay rather than weighing it. I've been doing pottery for a while, so I can really feel how much weight is in a ball of clay. But when I'm making mugs that will exist on shelves in a store, I want them to look relatively uniform, like they're a set. I just think it looks a lot better that way. And before I throw, I need to make a little room on my shelves. The mugs from yesterday are set up enough for me to gently take them off the bats and flip them over. I twist them off rather than pulling them off so the bottoms don't rip, and they come off pretty easily since I run a wire under each one immediately after throwing it. I'm going to let them continue drying upside down so that the bottoms can dry evenly with the rims. Something else I wanted to talk about here is my bat system. I don't really like to use regular bats, which usually fit onto the bat pins on the wheel head. I don't like having to mess with getting the bats on and off of the pins between throwing pieces, and I don't like how much space they took up on the shelf. For a while, I picked up my pieces right off the wheel head without a bat, but then sometimes the rims warp and the bottoms get weird, and it just became another thing to deal with. Now I use the Dirty Girls bat system. This is one master bat that fits onto the pins, and then smaller 6-inch bat inserts that fit into it. It's so quick to take them in and out between pieces, and 12 fit on one of my wear boards, so it's super space efficient too. I want to leave the mugs that I just threw out overnight to dry, but I covered the mugs from yesterday in plastic since they were almost dry enough and I didn't want them to get too hard overnight. And when I came in the next day, they were perfect. I pulled the brown clay mugs off the bats and flipped them over to start drying the bottoms, and then I got to work on the white clay mugs. I've gone through a few phases of trimming during my pottery career. Of course, when I started, like most people, trimming was a crucial step for me because I was bad at pottery and threw incredibly thick pieces that needed to be carved down and shaped. Since then, I've flip-flopped between trimming and cutting out trimming from my mug making process. For a while, I made mugs with a lot of excess clay at the bottom so I could trim a really defined foot, but for the last 2 years, I've mostly been making no-trim mugs. I do this by taking care to throw thin walls and carve away clay from the base with a wooden knife at the end of my throwing process. Then, when the piece sets up, I use my finger and a rib tool to smooth out the bottom. And just like trimming, my handle making has evolved a lot during my pottery career. I used to feel incredibly intimidated by making handles, and particularly by pulling handles. At the studio I started out at, most people pulled handles from a chunk of clay, let them set up, and then attached them to the mug. I felt overwhelmed by these steps of this process and moving the handle around so much, so I took to rolling out my handles, flattening them with my thumb, and then attaching them. But at the next studio that I worked at, I saw people pulling handles directly off the mug, and this worked so much better for me, and it's what I do now. So you might remember this wholesale order is for 3 designs, 2 of which are on white clay. The first design in white clay is just 3 little banana slugs all around the mug. I tried to create a sense of movement and flow across the piece by varying the direction the slugs are facing and also by making sure they're at different heights around the mug. My order of operations is always the same. I place the body of the slug, add the mantle and the little tentacles, and then use a wooden knife to add the texture to the skirt. As you can tell by the lighting change, it took me a few hours to sculpt all of these slugs, and remember, I still need to paint each one of them yellow. For now though, I'm covering them in plastic so they can dry slowly. In pottery, anytime you make an attachment, it's a good rule of thumb to use plastic to slow the drying process, which helps prevent cracking and joints splitting apart. The second design I'm going to create has 2 banana slugs and the word slugs across the mug. If you're noticing a theme here, it's because this order is actually for the bookstore at the University of California, Santa Cruz, where the banana slug, named Sammy, is the school mascot. They are truly everywhere in the redwoods here, and they really are super bright yellow in real life. I originally started making banana slug pottery because I am a Santa Cruz resident, and people here love to buy some slug stuff. Also, there's a never-ending cycle of thousands of new students every year, which means a never-ending cycle of new banana slug loving customers. Everyone would always say, "Oh my gosh, you need to sell those at the university," but I didn't really seriously consider it because in my experience, many of these types of gift shops only sell their own line of more mass-produced goods, and they're not down for my wares, which even at a wholesale price are much pricier than a mass-produced mug. But about a year ago, the manager at the university bookstore saw my work on Instagram and reached out about selling my mugs in the bookstore. He's passionate about selling local goods by independent makers in the store, which is amazing, and he's also an artist himself, so he is incredibly supportive of my process and understanding of my prices. This is the kind of wholesaler business relationship that fills my cup and I try to foster, and I'll link his Instagram where he puts his paintings in the description. So it was about a 12-hour day, but I did sculpt on all 24 of the white mugs. I set them on my shelf to dry and covered them with plastic overnight, and I checked on the brown mugs and they were almost perfect, so I covered them to slow down the drying process, and when I came in the next day, they were perfect to start working on. Same as the white clay mugs, I smooth out the bottoms, though with my brown clay, I'm careful about sponging them down too much because this clay has grog, and using the sponge excessively will make them feel gritty. These mugs are also getting 2 slugs and the word slugs, but they need to be in brown clay because after the first firing, I'll glaze them a bit differently than the mugs from yesterday. I am careful about what designs I agree to wholesale since I know that I'll have to make that design repeatedly and in large quantities. In comparison to some of my other designs, the slug mugs are relatively quick, and I don't feel burnt out when I'm making them over and over again. I won't wholesale my face designs, lady figures, or most of my animal designs like the octopus or elephant because these sculptures are a bit more technically intense and they overall require more emotional energy from me, so I don't feel available to make them in large quantities. They're also just significantly more time consuming, so selling them at a wholesale price would definitely not feel worth it. I mean, some of those designs barely feel worth it at my full retail price. For comparison, it takes me about 20 minutes to sculpt one of these slug mugs, while my octopus mugs take me upwards of an hour, and that time is just for the sculpting. It doesn't include the painting or glazing or even the throwing and handling. There's also a lot of time spent on other related tasks beyond just making the mugs, like loading the kiln. After about a week of drying, I put all of these mugs into the kiln for the first firing. Since there's no glaze yet, I can stack pieces to maximize the kiln space. This is the bisque firing, and we fire to cone 06 or about 1800 degrees Fahrenheit. This hardens the clay from greenware to ceramic so it's easier to handle for glazing, but it's not fully fired so the clay is still porous and it'll still absorb glaze. When glazing, I like to work as efficiently as possible and do one step for all of my pieces before moving on to the next step. So even though each design is getting glazed a bit differently, I still work on them all at once. All of the slugs are getting painted yellow, but the mugs in brown clay stay raw on the outside and only get glaze on the inside and rims and in the carvings. So that I don't have to wax the slugs later on, I do this first. This is my blue rutile glaze, and I pour it into the mugs, swirl it about, dump it out, and dip the rim. After I do this for each piece, I apply the glaze into the words and stamp marks I made before the bisque, and then wipe it away so it just emphasizes the markings. Now that that's done, it's time for the major task, which is to paint all of the banana slugs yellow. Don't worry, the other two designs will get glazed later on. I use the Western brand golden yellow color for my banana slugs. It's just the perfect shade straight out of the jar, so it's super convenient for me because I don't have to do any color mixing. On the white mugs, I can be a little messy with the application because they're going to get glazed all around them, and I definitely take advantage of this because each slug gets 2 coats of yellow, so it's already a time-consuming task, and not having to be so precise helps me move quickly. On the brown mugs, which aren't going to get glazed anymore, I have to be careful to not get yellow around the bodies of the slugs. After every slug is painted yellow, I add a little orange gradient and some spots. This is a color I mix up from my Amico Velvet brand underglazes. It's a little bit of their really bright orange, yellow, and black. This is definitely beginning to be a very late night, but I like to do the glazing for these pieces all in one go so I don't have to clean up and get everything out again. And in the background you can see that I came prepared with an Olipop. If I have a beverage as a little treat at the studio, it's really easy for me to sit down and conquer a big project. The vintage cola is my favorite flavor ever. After I paint the slugs yellow, I paint them with clear glaze so that they're shiny after the firing, and they just do well with one relatively thick coat. After the clear glaze, the mugs and brown clay are all done. I put them on the shelf to get loaded into the kiln, and then I get to waxing the rest of the mugs. I mix my wax with water for an easier application, and I apply it to the slugs and the bottom of the mugs. This will stop the glaze from sticking to them. I'm letting these sit overnight because I find that the wax repels glaze best when it's sat and dried for at least a few hours. The next day when I get into the studio, I dipped them all in glaze. One design is getting glazed in turquoise and the other is getting glazed in blue rutile. I've been getting a lot of comments recently asking about the brand of my glazes, and I'm sorry to report back that I make them all myself in my studio from scratch. I stopped using paint-on glazes a long time ago because of the time it takes, although I was obsessed with the Amico Potter's Choice glazes for so long, and buying pre-mixed dipping glazes online is so much more expensive than making them myself. As you can see, there's still a little bit of glaze sticking to wax that happens, so I am careful to wipe off all of the droplets before these go on the shelf. Unlike the bisque firing, pieces cannot touch in the glaze firing, but I still try to pack in everything as close as possible, though the kiln shelves had some glaze drips that I was too lazy to grind down today, so that's what that gap is. This firing took 10 hours and about a day to cool before I could unload it, but when I did, everything was perfect. I was slightly stressed about the mugs glazed in rutile because that recipe has been particularly runny and drippy for me recently, but nothing dripped. I also didn't lose any of the extras I made, so I'll either sell those at my markets and online shop, or I'll save them for the next order from UCSC. But this is how everything came out. This is the first order they've wanted the mugs in turquoise. Previously, I've only given them work glazed in my rutile, but I think that everything still matches and feels cohesive and just overall looks really good together, and I was really happy with how this batch came out. I forgot to record it, but I sanded everything down before I packed it up to take to campus. They were completely sold out for my last batch, so I was stoked to fill up my shelf again. And I didn't document this, but I also painted these little slug dishes for them, and I had greeting cards printed. It felt so good to put these pieces out on the shelf in the bookstore after spending so much time working on them. And that was my process for making a pottery wholesale order. Thank you so much for coming along and watching. I really hope you liked it, and I will see you next time. Bye!